This is why I don't hire people like you." The kitchen froze. A junior chef stopped mid-motion. Mrs. Rossi stood in the center of the kitchen in a champagne gown and a lifetime of unchallenged authority. She picked up a finished plate from the pass, looked at it, and set it back down like it had personally failed her. "I told them we should have hired a real French chef." Her eyes moved over Renee slowly, top to bottom. Not someone pretending to belong in rooms like this. Nobody said anything because everybody in that kitchen knew exactly what Mrs. Rossi meant. Renee sat down what she was holding, turned around fully, and looked at Mrs. Rossi the way you looked at something you had already decided wasn't worth your full energy, but were going to deal with anyway. "Not one plate has come back tonight." Mrs. Rossi's eyes narrowed. She stepped closer. "Excuse me, do you know whose house you are standing in right now?" "I know." Renee didn't move an inch. "And I know whose food your guests are eating. And I know that, right now in your dining room, people are too busy finishing their plates to have a single conversation." She tilted her head slightly. "So whatever point you're trying to make, the food already made mine." Mrs. Rossi's composure cracked at the edges. Her voice dropped. "You have a lot of nerve speaking to me like that." The voice came from the doorway like a blade through paper. Mrs. Rossi stopped mid-sentence. Marco Rossi stood at the kitchen entrance in a black suit. He looked at his mother. "You don't speak to people in my house like that. We'll talk later." The look he gave her was brief, but it was the kind of look that closed conversations permanently. Mrs. Rossi straightened, looked once more at Renee, then walked out without another word. The kitchen exhaled. Marco stood in the doorway for a moment. His eyes went back to Renee. She had already turned back to the pass and was reaching for her tweezers. "Please continue service," he said quietly to the room. He left. Renee thought that would be the last time she ever saw Marco Rossi. She was wrong. In rooms like that, people don't get insulted out loud. They get repositioned. Would you know how to respond, or would you fold? If this is your first time here, subscribe and like this video. Stay with me cause you don't want to miss what comes next. Renee was in her restaurant kitchen before sunrise the next morning, the way she always was, stock reducing, prep running, the day already organized in her head before anyone else had arrived. Her front-of-house manager appeared at the kitchen door, looking slightly uncertain. "There's a man asking for you. We're closed," he says. His name is Marco Rossi. Renee's hands didn't stop moving. "He can wait." She gave it 20 minutes. She had things to finish. But also, she wanted to know what he would do with 20 minutes. He was still there when she walked out, standing near the entrance, not seated, hands in his coat pockets. The kind of man who was used to being let in immediately and had chosen not to use that here. "I owe you an apology," he said. No preamble. "What happened last night was wrong. My mother was out of line, and I should have been there before it reached that point." Renee folded her arms. "You were there, not soon enough. You stopped it. I should have prevented it." He held her gaze. "There's a difference." She studied him. That distinction, the refusal to take partial credit and move on, was not what she had expected. Most men in his position would have accepted the easier version of the story. "I have lunch service soon," she said. "I know. Can I come back another time?" She almost said no. She had a rule about keeping things clean and professional and uncomplicated, but the way he asked stopped her. 11:30, she said. "Before service. 20 minutes." She went back into her kitchen. But later, that evening, after service was done and her team had gone home, something he had said stayed with her. Not the apology. The distinction he had made between stopping something and preventing it. The way he had held himself accountable for the part nobody would have blamed him for. She couldn't decide yet whether that made him impressive or dangerous. He came back at 11:20. She came out at 11:30 exactly. They sat at the corner table near the window. She had coffee. He took whatever she offered without requesting anything specific. She noted that he asked about Paris. She told him about the first kitchen where the head chef deliberately gave her the worst station and she outperformed everyone in it within 3 weeks. He listened the way people listened when they were actually following every word rather than assembling their response. "Why food?" he said. She considered it properly. "Because my mother could take almost nothing and make it feel like the world was going to be all right. I wanted to do that for other people." He was quiet for a moment. "You do?" She looked at him. "You've eaten at my restaurant once, twice," he said. "The first time was 8 months ago before the estate contract. You weren't in the kitchen that night." She hadn't known that. She filed it away without reacting. The 20 minutes became an hour. Her sous chef appeared at the kitchen door and raised an eyebrow. She gave him a look that sent him back through it. He came back the following week and the week after, always 11:30, always the corner table. The conversations moved further in each time. Food, family, loss, what it actually cost to build something and keep it standing. He told her what happened when his father died and how fast the room tried to swallow him. "Do you ever stop?" she said. He looked at her. "Do you?" She picked up her coffee. A beat passed between them that was warmer than either of them acknowledged. But what Renee didn't know yet was that someone had already noticed how often Marco kept returning to the restaurant, and she was already making phone calls. He asked her to dinner 3 weeks later. She raised an eyebrow. "You want to take a chef to another restaurant? I want to give you one meal where you're not responsible for everyone else in the room." That answer was too accurate for comfort. She looked at him for a moment. 7. Don't be late. He was not late. The restaurant he chose was quiet and precise, the kind of place that understood restraint. She picked up the menu and he watched her read it. "Stop watching me read the menu," she said without looking up. "I'm watching you. Decide whether you respect it." She put the menu down. "The braise on the second page is overworked. Everything else is considered. Should we leave?" "Absolutely not. I want to taste the braise." He smiled then, and she looked at him longer than she meant to. The evening moved easily. She laughed twice without meaning to, and caught him storing both of them quietly, not reacting, just keeping them somewhere. That particular attention unsettled her more than any obvious charm would have. She drove home afterward and sat in her car outside her building for a few minutes, not thinking about anything specific and everything at once. And somewhere across the city, Mrs. Rossi was already making phone calls. 2 weeks later, her business manager called her into the office and laid 3 folders on the desk. "We lost the Bianchi Group event inquiry. The Conti family's private dinner was postponed indefinitely. Ferrari and Associates have gone completely quiet after 3 weeks of active conversation." Renee looked at the folders. Same 2-week window. Yes. Overlapping referral network. Her manager hesitated. Yes. She sat back, said nothing for a moment, then "Give me 48 hours. She made her own calls, quietly, methodically. By the second day, she had enough to understand the shape of what had happened. Even without the complete picture, she called each client directly. She sent her full portfolio, press reviews, client testimonials going back 4 years. She had a conversation with each one that was so precise and so unhurried that by the end of the week, every client was back on the table. Then she called the events agency and had a conversation with the director that left no ambiguity about what she knew and what she expected going forward. She did not call Marco. Marco found out 3 days later, and when he did, the conversation with his mother changed something permanently inside that family. He went to his mother that same evening. Mrs. Rossi was in the sitting room when he walked in, composed, already organizing the version of events she intended to present. He didn't give her the opening. "You went after her. Business. I was protecting this family. Say it clearly." His voice was level and completely cold. "You went after her livelihood. Quietly behind my back. Say it." Mrs. Rossi looked at him. "She is not appropriate, Marco." Whatever you think you are building with this woman is not your decision. He took one step into the room and stopped. This family's business is my decision. Who sits at my table is my decision, and what you did going behind my back to damage someone's income because you don't approve of my choices ends today. I am your mother and I am the head of this family. The quiet in his voice was absolute. Those two things can coexist, but not like this. He left the room. His mother sat very still in the silence he left behind. She had spent 30 years being the most powerful person in every room she entered. She was beginning to understand that the woman in Marco's kitchen had not found that impressive in the slightest. That bothered her more than she expected. Marco went to the restaurant that evening after service. The front of house was dark. The kitchen light was still on. Her chef let him in, looked between them once and found somewhere else to be. Renee was at the prep counter, not cooking, just sitting with a glass of water and the look of someone who had spent everything they had on the week and was quietly taking stock of what remained. She saw his face when he walked in. "You found out. Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I handled it. Renee, every client is back. The agency has been spoken to. It's done." She looked at him steadily. "I didn't need you in the middle of something between me and your mother. I've been handling things myself for a long time, Marco." He stood across the counter from her. "I know you have." A pause. "That's exactly what worries me." She looked at him. "You handled it," he said. "You always handle it, but you shouldn't have had to. And the fact that you didn't call me," he stopped. Started again. "You don't have to do everything alone anymore. That's all I'm saying." The kitchen was quiet around them. She looked at him for a long moment. This man who kept showing up, who kept making the distinction between what was acceptable and what wasn't, who had never once asked her to be smaller or quieter or easier. "Your mother isn't going to stop," she said. "My mother doesn't have to approve. She has to respect it. There's a difference, and I'm going to make sure she understands it." Renee held his gaze. Something in her that had been braced for 2 weeks loosened very slightly. "I know," she said quietly. It was not a declaration, but he received it for exactly what it was. 2 weeks later came the industry event. Black tie executives, investors, the kind of crowd where names carried weight and everyone was quietly measuring everyone else. Marco brought Renee. They walked in together and the room recalibrated immediately. That subtle collective adjustment of people processing new information. He stayed close to her as they moved through the space. Not possessively, just present. Then a man materialized beside them. Silver-haired, expensive suit, the easy confidence of someone who had never once been the least important person in a room. He looked at Renee with the particular smile of someone about to say something they consider charming. "Marco, good to see you." His eyes moved to Renee. "And this is Renee Oji." Marco said 2 Michelin stars, the best restaurant in the country currently. The man's smile stayed in place. "Interesting. I didn't realize chefs were attending these evenings now." A light laugh. "I thought she handled catering." Renee opened her mouth. Marco spoke first. "Then your palate is less educated than I thought. Completely calm, completely final." He held the man's gaze for exactly 1 second. "Excuse us." He moved them forward through the crowd. The room had heard it. Nobody said anything, but the silence had a particular quality to it. Renee walked beside him for a moment. Then quietly, "I had that." "I know you did." "Then why?" "Because I wanted to." He glanced at her. "You handle everything yourself. You didn't have to handle that one." She looked at him, not because he had defended her. Men with power defended things when it suited them, but because he had done it without hesitation, without looking around to see who was watching, without needing any credit for it afterward. That was the moment something shifted that she stopped pretending wasn't shifting. But it was also the moment she understood that choosing Marco was not going to be a quiet thing. The next morning, she had 3 missed calls from a number she didn't recognize. When she called back, it was a journalist, low tier, but connected enough, asking for a comment on her relationship with Marco Rossi and whether she thought it was appropriate given the family's business interests. Someone had clearly fed the story deliberately. It had the particular shape of something designed to make her look like an opportunist. She hung up without commenting. That afternoon, one of the Rossi Group's board members, a man in his 60s who had known Marco's father, called Marco directly. He had heard about the chef. He wanted to express his concerns about optics, about the family's image, about distractions at a critical period in the company's expansion. Marco listened to the full call, let the man finish, then said, "I appreciate the concern. It won't be happening again," and ended the call. His assistant appeared in his office doorway. "Sir, get me a table at Renee's restaurant tonight after service." "Of course. Should I?" "Just the table." He arrived that evening while her team was still cleaning down. She came out of the kitchen with her chef's coat still on and saw him at the corner table and stopped. "You look like something happened," she said. "Several things happened." He looked at her. None of them changed anything. She studied him. The board, one of them, and nothing. I told him it wasn't his concern. He held her gaze. "I need you to understand something, Renee. My mother's resistance, the board, whoever is feeding stories to journalists, none of it changes where I stand. I'm not going to keep making you wonder about that." She was quiet for a moment. The kitchen sounds behind her were winding down. The city outside was going dark. "You're very certain," she said. "About very few things," he said. "About this?" "Yes." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she pulled out the chair across from him and sat down. "I'll make you something," she said. "You look like you haven't eaten." He almost smiled. "I came here to reassure you and you're feeding me. You can do both," she said and went back into her kitchen. The gala was already decided before Renee walked in. Marco was beside her, steady as always, not pulling her forward, not shielding her, just there, as if that alone was a position he refused to negotiate. Mrs. Rossi received them at the entrance with practiced warmth. "Welcome," she said lightly, greeting Marco first, then the couple beside them, then the next. Renee stood there for half a beat longer than necessary, not waiting, measuring. Mrs. Rossi did not look at her directly. It was not obvious. It didn't need to be. The absence of recognition did the work cleanly. Renee accepted a glass of champagne from a passing tray without breaking expression and stepped forward with Marco. Nothing changed in her face, but the space around her did. At the table, the seating was already arranged, like a conclusion disguised as logistics. She noticed before she sat down. Not her table, not his table. A third table, slightly removed, close enough to pretend it was a coincidence, far enough that no one would confuse it with inclusion. The women at the table were already mid-conversation when she arrived. They adjusted instantly, too quickly to be natural. The first smile came in carefully. "Renee, right?" The second followed it, then the question, "Where did you train originally?" A pause just long enough to imply context mattered. "Before Paris, of course." Another smile. "I imagine it must have been quite an adjustment." Renee listened without reacting, not because she was ignoring them, because she was deciding how much of herself they were allowed to meet. She took a sip of champagne, slow, measured. The third woman leaned slightly forward, eyes drifting over her place card as if reading it for the first time. "Oh," she said with polite confusion that landed worse than insult. "Are you part of the service staff? I wasn't sure whether to ask you for water." The table didn't react immediately. That delay was the loudest thing in the room. Renee looked at her. "No." A faint smile. "That's funny. I was about to ask which table you were assigned to." The woman blinked once. No one at the table spoke. At the main table, Marco had already been watching. He didn't move immediately. He set his fork down, excused himself without breaking conversation, and crossed the room. No urgency in his pace, which made it worse. When he arrived beside her, the table's atmosphere shifted before he even spoke. People didn't look at him directly at first. They looked at what changed in the air around him. "My apologies," he said evenly. "She's at my table." He extended his hand. The silence that followed wasn't confusion anymore. It was comprehension. Renee looked at him for a second longer than necessary. Then she took his hand and stood. The movement was simple, but the room reacted as if something had been rewritten. They walked. Marco pulled out his chair. She sat. He sat beside her. And without explanation, without acknowledgement, he resumed dinner as if nothing had ever been out of place. That refusal to perform reassurance did more than any speech could have. Across the table, Mrs. Rossi did not move. Her expression did not crack, but something in her stillness had changed shape. Renee picked up her glass again, took a slow sip, and allowed herself exactly one breath of satisfaction before smoothing her face back into neutrality. 40 minutes later, the first phone lit up. It was not dramatic. No announcement. No sound. Just a subtle shift. Someone's eyes dropping to their screen mid-conversation. Then stillness. Then another phone. Then another. Marco felt it before he saw it. His attention shifted slightly. Then he looked down. He did not react immediately. He looked at Renee. She hadn't seen it yet. Her attention was still on the table beside her, mid-sentence, composed, unaware of the rerouting of the room's gravity. Her phone lit up on the table. She saw it. The expression didn't change. Not at first. Her eyes moved once, then she set the phone down very carefully. Silence gathered around her without permission. Conversations didn't stop. They failed one by one until the room itself felt like it was holding its breath. Then movement began. Not all at once, but in waves. People standing, approaching. Recognition arriving too late to be casual. People began to stand. Renee rose without urgency. She accepted hands with the same controlled precision she used in her kitchen. Nothing in her posture suggested surprise, but nothing in the room suggested neutrality anymore either. At some point, a photographer appeared. No one invited them. They simply arrived because the room had become worth documenting. And at the head of the table, Mrs. Rossi finally looked directly at her. Not long, but fully. For the first time that evening, Marco leaned slightly toward Renee, low enough that no one else caught it. "I told you." She didn't turn to him, but her mouth moved faintly. "You did," she said. And this time, it wasn't acknowledgement. It was acceptance. She called her mother from the car on the way home. Got 3 words out before neither of them could speak. They stayed on the phone for 20 minutes, saying very little and meaning everything. Marco drove. He didn't interrupt the call. He just drove and let her have it. When she hung up, the car was quiet for a moment. The city moved past the windows. "Thank you," she said. "For tonight, the table. You should have been there from the beginning." "I know, but thank you. Anyway." He glanced at her. She was looking out of the window with the expression of someone sitting quietly inside, a moment they've been working toward for a very long time. He drove her home, walked her to her door. She turned at the threshold and looked at him. "Come to the restaurant tomorrow night," she said. "After service, I want to cook for you. Just you. I'll be there." The next day, Marco's mother called him. "I want to meet her," she said properly. "Just the 2 of us." He was quiet for a moment. "I'll let her know," Renee agreed, without making it a big thing. She picked the restaurant, neutral ground, her terms, and arrived first. Mrs. Rossi came in, saw her, and sat down. No performance, no champagne gown, just a woman who had watched an entire room turn toward someone she had tried to diminish and had spent 3 days sitting with what that meant. Neither of them spoke immediately. Then Mrs. Rossi said, "I owe you more than what I gave you in that kitchen." Renee looked at her. "Yes, you do." Mrs. Rossi received that without flinching. "I didn't dislike you. I didn't know you. And I let what I didn't know make me cruel. A pause. That was wrong. Renee studied her across the table. Your son is a good man. Whatever you did right, raising him, you did a lot of it right. Something shifted in Mrs. Rossi's face. The particular expression of a woman being given something she hadn't earned and knowing it. He chose well, she said quietly. I see that now. They didn't leave, as friends. But something that had been open and unresolved between them finally closed. At the door, Mrs. Rossi shook her hand, held it a moment longer than necessary. It was enough. He was there at the restaurant in the evening. She cooked him 4 courses with no menu and no plan, just whatever she felt like making. He sat at the kitchen counter and watched her work. And she forgot to perform anything and just cooked the way she cooked when nobody was supposed to be watching. He didn't speak much. He didn't need to. He was simply entirely present in a way that made the kitchen feel fuller than it ever did with a room full of paying guests. After the 4th course, she sat across from him and they finished the wine in the quiet of the empty restaurant. What's next? He said. She looked at him across the kitchen. The 3rd star sitting somewhere in her chest like something finally settled. Everything, she said. He looked at her for a long moment. Then I need to show you something. He took her back to the restaurant where they'd had their first dinner. She didn't realize it until they pulled up outside and she looked at the sign and then at him. You remembered? I remember everything. Same table, same corner, same light falling through the same window. She sat down and felt the particular fullness of a circle closing. This is where I knew, he said. You barely knew me then. I knew enough. You ordered the braise deliberately to test it. You drove yourself. You gave me 20 minutes and meant every second of it. He looked at her. I knew what kind of person you were before you said a single important thing. She held his gaze. He reached into his jacket. She looked at the box. At him. Back at the box. Marco, I'm not asking you to change a single thing about what you've built. His voice was quiet and completely certain. The world already knows what you are. I just want to spend the rest of my life being worthy of standing beside it. Yes, she said. He slid the ring onto her finger. She looked at it for a moment, really looked at it, and then looked at him, and the smile that came had nowhere to hide. He held her face in both hands and kissed her right there in the corner by the window while the city moved outside and the light fell exactly the way it had the very first time. And Renee Oji, who had built everything herself, who had never once waited for a room to accept her, who had walked into every space in her life and made it better simply by being there, let herself feel completely and without apology what it was to finally be chosen by someone worth being chosen by. If someone spoke to you the way Mrs. Rossi spoke to Renee in that kitchen, would you stay calm or walk straight out? And tell me honestly, do you think Marco fell for her the moment she stood her ground and didn't move an inch? Drop your answer in the comments. Subscribe and stay with me for the next